May I come in?
If you bend your medial collateral ligaments, place one talus in front of another, I don't see where you'd have a problem. Of course, if there were a news story covering this event, the headline might read, "Small Brain Enters Room."
Fingers. What's the answer?
Oh, you're another one of those bright young fellows who always know the right answer, huh? Welcome to real life. How many do you see?
There are 4 fingers, aren't there?
No. Look at me. You're focusing on the problem. If you focus on the problem, you can't see the solution. Never focus on the problem. Look at me. How many do you see? No. Look beyond the fingers. How many do you see? 8. 8. 8. Yes. 8's a good answer. Yes. See what no one else sees. See what everyone else chooses not to see. Out of fear, conformity, and laziness. See the whole world anew each day. Now, the truth is, you're well on the way. You didn't see something here besides a crazy, bitter old man. You wouldn't have come in the first place.
What do you see when you look at me, Arthur?
You fixed my cup. I'll see you around. Patch.
Well, good morning, everyone, again. My, big crowd. You like to come out for snow days. And by the way, who saw this snow coming? My goodness, I thought, you did? You saw it coming? I looked at the map and the weather forecast, and it looked like it was like clean and green and it's 40, 50 degrees all week. And here we are with more snow. Evidently, it's not done yet, huh? So, and welcome to all of you who are watching on our live stream. We've made some adjustments. We know that the audio has been really low. So if you want to give us some feedback, let us know how that's going. It should be better today. Let us know. If it's not, we'll continue to try to adjust. So it's good to, again, good to have you all here. And I will tell you that I had to seriously shift gears this week in terms of what I was going to do with the sermon. We're in the middle of this, or towards the end of this sermon series called Faith in the Movies. And I was going to finish up these last 2 weeks with superhero movies. This week was going to be The Dark Knight, which is the best of the Batman movies, those of you who are into that sort of thing. And that would have led us into a conversation about Jesus as a sacrifice for sin. But we're not going to go there today because something happened this week, and I just want to share some of that with you. And it came in the form of Tuesday night at a meeting. Now imagine this, folks, a church meeting that we could actually talk about in a sermon. Some of you have been to church meetings before, obviously. You know what I'm talking about. And it was a good meeting. We sat down and the leaders got together. The church council folks, people are on church council, committee people all got together, and we sat down for a couple hours and just looked towards the future. And as I thought about all the things that happened that night, I thought about this movie, Patch Adams, which came out, I think, about 20 years ago now, maybe a little more than that. And I remember seeing it. I remember thinking it was a fantastic film. And so I happened to have it in my video library. I pulled it out. I watched it again. And it's not as good as I remember. But it has its moments. And the clip you just saw is one of those moments. So, basic story, this man by the name of Hunter Adams, he's, at the beginning of the movie, he's this lost and alone guy, and he's just sort of adrift and wandering and purposeless. So much so that depression has taken a hold of him and he's become suicidal. So, and I believe this is in the 60s. True story, by the way. He checks himself into a mental hospital where he meets a whole bunch of people in this mental ward who are seriously messed up with all kinds of mental illnesses that just haunt them, including this guy that you met here, a guy by the name of Arthur, who, as the story goes, is this brilliant mathematician, and he's a wealthy guy, and he too has checked himself in for whatever reason, but he walks around, he looks crazy to everybody. He walks around the ward all day long, holding up 4 fingers and saying, 4, 4, 4. He looks at people, he goes, 4? You're all insane. And of course, all these people that are in this mental hospital are cared for by these doctors. Sorry about this, docs, but you're going to take a black eye on this movie. These doctors who have right answers with their diagnosis, they can kind of put people in the right place, and their treatment plans, and these well-scripted group therapy sessions, because they believe that they see what the problem is. They believe they know how to fix it. They understand. But really, they don't see anything. All they see is this. And so Hunter Adams, he knows there's something behind all of this. And so he goes into the room, the clip you just saw. He said, the fingers, what's the answer? We have to look beyond the fingers. You have to look beyond the problem to the person behind the problem. Because if you only look at the fingers, you'll never come up with the right answer. All you'll do is come up with correct answers that are completely misguided, that completely miss the point. Don't look at the problem. Look at the person behind the problem. And then you'll begin to see what's really going on. And you saw the clip. And all of a sudden, Patch starts seeing things in a new way. He now has a nickname, Patch Adams. He starts seeing things in a new way. Arthur says, don't be conformed by this. Most people will never see this stuff, or they don't want to see this stuff because they're afraid to see it, because it doesn't conform to what they know is the truth right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. He says, see the world new every day. And Patch Adams begins to do that. And pretty soon his life of directionlessness begins to change. And he sees a purpose for himself. And he checks himself out of the mental hospital against doctors' advice so that he can go to medical school and become a healer, a Patch. Let's sing. Okay, so I'd like you to hold that thought for a few minutes because I want to now tell you a little bit about what happened on Tuesday night and the conversation we had. We're going to come back to this, don't worry, because I think there's some interesting things here. But I just want to fill you in a little bit about what happened and how the conversation unfolded. So we're together, and of course, I started things off by doing what I always do. I tell a story. And I told about a place that's very near and dear to my heart. And it's been that way since 1974 when I first visited this place. I was in a youth group at Morningside Lutheran in Sioux City, and we went to the Boundary Waters canoe area and took a canoe trip out of a place called Wilderness Canoe Base. And the first day we paddled across Seagull Lake, and we portaged 90 rods in, 98 rods in, whatever it was, to this place called Alpine Lake. And Alpine Lake's a pretty good sized lake. Not as big as Seagull, but it's a good sized lake, but it's got islands all over the place. And so it looks smaller than it really is. And in fact, very often those islands, they give a sense between the island and the land and island to island. It gives this sense that you're in these narrow passageways. And then the hills rise up very dramatically out of the water up to a very high point. And then on top of all of this are evergreen trees, firs and pines and whatever else, spruces, and some of them extend up another 50, 60 feet above the tops of the hills and the ridges. And when you're paddling through this place the first time, I will never forget it. I felt like I was paddling through a cathedral. And I love the place so much, Jill and I went there, we went through this lake on our honeymoon. And I've been there a couple of times since. And so 2 years ago, when we first became pastor in parish, I set up a canoe trip for our youth. And we were going to Wilderness Canoe Base. And I was so excited because I knew it was just a short paddle in, and I would be able to show these kids that were going on the canoe trip with me a place that was so near and dear to my heart, and this absolutely stunning scenery. And so we paddled in, and then we portaged in, and oh my, what a disappointment. About a dozen years earlier, there'd been a forest fire. And it had burned everything down to the ground. You could see still a few upright trees that were still charred 12 years later. You know anything about forest fires? They're kind of a double-edged sword. Because on one side, a place like Alpine Lake, the cathedral's gone. But the other side of things is that everything is new. Instead of 50, 60-foot evergreen trees, they're 5 to 8 foot saplings. And it's all brand new. Now, here's the thing. In 74 and 83 and 85 and up until just 14 years ago now, that forest looked healthy. It was stunning and it was beautiful and it was healthy. It looked healthy, but it was not. Because underneath that lush 50, 60-foot canopy was all this undergrowth and all this brush, and especially all of these, they call windfall trees. The trees fall down, the trees die, and they lay all over the forest floor. So much so that if a seed for a new tree were to drop onto the ground, there's very little chance it would survive. You see, it takes clearing. It takes a forest fire to clear the floor and make way for new growth. Well, I thought about that when I thought about the church, the Lutheran church, and really even First Lutheran, because I really believe with all my heart, and you've heard me talk about these numbers, where the Lutheran church is going in the next 30 years. I believe we need just that kind of forest fire. And I think First Lutheran's no exception. And I know some of you will probably take exception with me because some of you have come back to church in the last couple of years. Some of you have started coming here and you say, oh no, Pastor Dave, we're the exception rather than the rule. I mean, look at all the good things that are happening. If you want to just go out there and take a look at an annual report, by the way, this is a new one. I'm talking about a church meeting and an annual report in a sermon. Some of you read the annual report too, haven't you? If you take a look, the attendance records for the last 2 years, we were up in 18, we were up even higher in 19. And then there's all the new programs that we've been establishing in the last couple of years. It started about a year and a half ago with the Kids First summer program, the summer reading and math program. And we had on average about 27 kids here, and their families would come in twice a week. And then that morphed into Wednesday nights, and you know what's happened there. And then we went and we had last summer, we had our first in-house vacation Bible school, first time in, what, a decade? Long time. And now we have this partnership with Lutheran Church of Hope. Good things happening there. And we're reaching out, our live stream. I mean, I could go on. The list is kind of endless, and you might think and say, Pastor Dave, that's not us. Look at what's happened. We're kind of in a good place right now. We're heading in this direction, kind of slowly heading up. And you know, you wouldn't be wrong about that. It's true. But I have a prediction for you. And as I told the group on Tuesday, that prediction might surprise you. I would not be surprised if we stay on the current course as we're doing, exactly what we're doing, that at some point, pretty soon, it's going to plateau, and then shortly after that, it's going to do that. Wouldn't be surprised in the least. In fact, I'll predict it. Some because the novelty is going to wear off. But more importantly, and this is important to understand, basically, at the core, we're the same First Lutheran Church that we were 5 years ago, the same First Lutheran Church that we were 10 years ago, and the same First Lutheran Church we were 20 years ago. I think there needs to be a fire. I think something needs to burn away the floor of the forest. Now, please understand, and I want to be very clear about this. This isn't about people. It isn't about, well, if that person goes, that person goes, that person goes, the floor of the forest is going to be clear. Nothing could be further from the truth. Everyone here is a deeply valuable member, whether you've been here your first Sunday today or you've been here for the last 75 years. Everybody's valuable. Everybody's important to this cause called First Lutheran. This place where we share the gospel of Jesus Christ with others. So it's not about people. It's really more about the way we see ourselves and how we do business as a church. Case in point. Last week I was driving up to work, and as I sometimes do, very often do, I get my phone out and I listen to the sermon from the previous week from Lutheran Church of Hope. And Pastor Mike Householder, he was preaching that day, and he was talking about the boxes that we create for each other, and we like to put people in boxes. And so we did this little exercise with his congregation. He had them stand up and down. He would say something, and then if it applies to you, you stand up, and then you sit down, and then he says the next thing, you stand up and you sit down. And at first, it's a lot of fun, because he's just having fun. So he would say at first, those of you who are the class clown, you don't need to do this. Those of you who are the class clown, stand up. And people would stand up. He had a shot from behind him. You could see people standing up. And then, okay, sit down. Those of you who love to dance, stand up. And a bunch of people stand up. Those of you whose favorite team won the Super Bowl, stand up. And everybody, and not everybody, but a lot of people stood up and down. And he just kind of rolled that way for a little while. And then it started getting a little more serious. He said, Those of you who have experienced a debilitating illness, stand up. People stood up. Those of you who have been bullied, stand up. Those of you who have bullied, stand up. Those of you who have recently experienced the death of a loved one, stand up. Those of you who have a family member or a friend who has told you that they're gay, stand up. And they stood up and they sat down. And they stood up and they sat down. I have a couple of hunches about this. First hunch is this. I'm guessing, that's pretty out there. I'm guessing that when some of these people stood up, the person sitting next to them who happened to be a loved one may or may not have known this about their relative or their spouse or their child until the moment they stood up. And I would love to have been in the conversation after church on that one. The other hunch I have is this, that if we were to try to do that here in this room, probably wouldn't work. Now, I think we'd be okay with some of the fun stuff, but what about when it gets serious? Think it would work? I don't know. I suspect that there'd be some that would think, well, this is a little unseemly for me to be participating in something like this. But more than likely, most folks, they'd be afraid to stand up and be seen for what they are. Because they'd be afraid that the rest of us might judge them, might think less of them. I don't know. See, the reason that a place like Lutheran Church of Hope does such good things and breaks such new ground, and by the way, in case you don't know, this is a church in West Des Moines. They worship about 12,000 people a week. It gives you an idea. And I don't really care so much about the numbers, but what I care about is what happens on a Sunday morning like this last Sunday morning. And the reason it works there, it's not because they're big, and it's not because they're in a high-density population area, and it's not because they've got a lot of money or lots of cool toys. It's because they have opened themselves up to a God who regularly burns away the floor of their forest so that new growth can occur and new life can rise up. And those are the kinds of things, frankly, that's who we were 5, 10, 20 years ago, and it's still with us. It's still there. And I guess the question I want to ask to you folks before we go on to sing again is, what about us? How can God take this place with these people and burn away the underbrush to create a floor where seed can spring up and rise in new growth? Let's sing. that you read today, and St. Paul says, lesson, that we don't evaluate people, others, from a human point of view. That we don't see this. We see the person behind this. And when we look there, we see the world in a different way. When we look there, we don't see the problems and we don't see the walls that people put up, but instead we see the person behind the wall. We see behind the anger. We see behind the way people will wall themselves off and they're shy, or they're happy excessively, too excessively, so much so they're hiding something, or this or that, or maybe they just look like they have everything together. Look past that. Don't see people, don't evaluate people the way the world evaluates people. See them as cups that need a patch. See them as children of God who have a Savior that they need to come to know. See them that way, and the world around us will change. What if we were to become a church like that? What if we were to become a place where when we walk into this room, we see each other for what we are? Each of us are. No pretense. Nothing. Except for the reason that we're here. The real reason that we're here. The need, the hurt, the sorrow, the pain. Whatever it might be. And then behind that, a child of God who's aching and searching for redemption. So, the meeting we had on Tuesday, I gave everybody a little homework assignment before they came to the meeting. And I asked them, some of you did this, which is really cool because that's part of the great discussion. I asked them to call somebody that they know, that they know that this person either does not go to church, or else because they don't have a church, or else they belong to a church but they don't go anymore. And I asked them if they, just interview them and see what they have to say. And these were some of the instructions I gave them. I said, tell them you're from the leadership team at First Lutheran Church and that you want to understand why people don't go to church. Let them know we're trying to turn over a new leaf here, and we're not going to use your name, but we're just interested to hear from you. And then ask them to tell their story. And then I said, now you're going to hear some things that you're not going to like, that you believe are wrong. Don't try to correct it. Don't try to fix their perception. Just let them talk. Give them a chance to say what they need to say. And then, when they're done with it, say, tell me more about this. And then also, the other thing that might happen is you might end up in a pretty intense situation. Because very often people stop going to church because something's happened to them at church. They've been burned by somebody at church. They've been hurt. They felt like they've been judged at church. Listen to those things carefully. Don't fix it. Don't correct it. Just walk beside them. And so we came to the meeting, and some folks did this, and it was amazing, some of the discussion. I had text messages afterwards and text messages the following day from folks that had conversations with people that they knew. And they were surprised at how willing and ready people were to talk about these things and how open they were. Simply because we're looking here. We're looking out here to the person behind. And we just let them talk. Let them tell their story. And in so doing, maybe for the first time, felt like somebody cared about them. Somebody loved them. I did this. I asked for folks to do this just so that as leaders you get an idea what's out there. But something very unexpected happened. Some of those conversations turned into moments of evangelism. Moments where they reached out and touched a hurting soul with the love of Jesus simply by listening. I'd encourage you all to do the same. And if you want these instructions, I'll have them available for you afterwards, after church. If everyone did that, just called one person and asked them to tell their story, changes them, changes us. So that we're no longer a place that's perceived to have all the right answers. A place where it looks like everybody's perfect. Instead, it's a house of love. A place where we evaluate folks, not in the ways of the world, but through the love and mercy of Jesus Christ our Lord. And for that we give him thanks and praise. Amen.